A federal court has blocked President Trump's tariffs on imports from nearly every other country, and Trump says he's considering pardons for the men convicted of conspiring to kidnap the governor of Michigan. Good morning, I'm Corva Coleman from NPR News, and here are today's top stories. A federal court has blocked President Trump's sweeping tariffs. NPR's Scott Horsley reports the U.S. Court of International Trade says Trump overstepped his authority by taxing imports from nearly every other country.
In a unanimous ruling, the three-judge panel said the Constitution gives Congress the exclusive power to regulate trade and impose tariffs. The court says the 1977 emergency law Trump relied on in ordering tariffs does not give the president unbounded power to tax imports from nearly every other country. If that ruling stands, it would strike down all the tariffs that Trump ordered on April 2nd, as well as separate taxes on imports from China, Canada, and Mexico, some of which have been temporarily suspended. The tariffs were challenged by a dozen states and 5 businesses. The 3 judges who ruled against the president were appointed by Presidents Reagan, Obama, and Trump himself. Scott Horsley, NPR News.
President Trump says he's considering pardons for the men convicted of conspiring to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. NPR's Franco Ordonez reports Trump said he had watched the men's trial.
President Trump said the case against the 2 men appears to be somewhat of a, quote, railroad job.
I'll be honest with you, it looked to me like some people said some stupid things, They were drinking, and I think they said stupid things, but I'll take a look at that.
Barry Croft Jr. was sentenced to nearly 20 years, while Adam Fox was sentenced to 16 years after being convicted of leading a violent scheme to kidnap Governor Whitmer during the final stretch of the 2020 presidential election. Defense lawyers have claimed the men were victims of entrapment and that government informants egged them on. But last month, a federal appeals court upheld their convictions. Franco Ordonez, NPR News, the White House.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the U.S. will aggressively revoke visas from many Chinese students. NPR's Emily Fang reports.
The State Department said in a cable this week it was pausing interview signups for new student visa applicants in order to adequately screen their social media profiles. And now Rubio says the U.S. will enhance visa application scrutiny for students coming from China and Hong Kong and terminate the visas for students with, quote, connections to China's ruling Communist Party and those who study in what he called critical fields. Depending on how broadly the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security define those criteria, this could affect many of the some 280,000 Chinese students at all levels in the U.S. China is the second biggest source of international students in the U.S., having recently been eclipsed by India. Emily Fang, NPR News, Washington.
A judge has ruled Secretary of State Rubio likely violated the Constitution. That's after he stripped Mahmoud Khalil's green card and ordered him deported over pro-Palestinian activism at Columbia University. NPR's Adrian Florido reports the judge stopped short of ordering Khalil freed from custody.
Judge Michael Farbiar said in his ruling that Rubio likely overstepped when he relied on an obscure statute that allows him to personally order someone deported who he thinks threatens U.S. foreign policy goals. Rubio claimed, without offering evidence, that Khalil's protests were anti-Semitic and therefore undermined what Rubio said are the government's efforts to fight anti-Semitism worldwide. The judge said using that authority to go after Khalil for his protests would probably be proven unconstitutional at trial. His lawyers hoped the judge would free Khalil from immigration detention as the case moves forward, but the judge said his legal team needs to submit more evidence to show how Khalil is being harmed by his detention. Adrian Florido, NPR News.
The Department of Health and Human Services has canceled the only federal contract to develop a vaccine to protect people against the bird flu virus. NPR's Rob Stein has more.
Federal officials are canceling a contract with Moderna to develop an mRNA vaccine to protect people against flu strains that could cause pandemics. That includes the H5N1 bird flu virus that's been spreading among dairy cows in the U.S. The cancellation comes even though the company says a study involving 300 healthy adults has produced positive results. An HHS spokesman says the contract was canceled because of concerns about the safety of mRNA vaccines. Rob Stein, NPR News.
The National Association of the Deaf is suing the White House. The organization says the use of American Sign Language interpreters abruptly stopped during press briefings when President Trump returned to office. NPR's Kristen Wright reports that's despite the organization's repeated requests.
The federal lawsuit is filed on behalf of two deaf men who watched televised White House press briefings and have trouble understanding closed captioning, which can be unreliable. The suit says the men and others in the deaf community are missing a litany of vital information on the economy, Social Security, and DEI, among other issues affecting Americans. ASL is the primary language for many deaf people. Joy Bannister contracts ASL interpreters to the federal government.
It's really at the detriment to our deaf community. So we want to make sure that they're able still to be a part of the community and have the accesses that they need.
In 2020, NAD reached a federal settlement ordering the Trump White House to provide ASL interpreters for coronavirus-related public briefings. Kristen Wright, NPR News, Washington.
Israel is accusing the UN of pressing aid groups not to take part in an aid distribution program in Gaza backed by Israel and the U.S. NPR's Michelle Kellerman reports the UN says the program does not meet basic humanitarian principles.
Israeli Ambassador Danny Danon says the UN is acting like the mafia, telling non-governmental groups not to take part in the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation.
It is a shakedown by UN mobsters. How can they do that?
UN envoy Sigrid Kaag says she's worried about the, quote, privatization and weaponization of aid in Gaza, and she said much more is needed as Palestinians are on the brink of famine.
Instead of saying goodbye, see you tomorrow, Palestinians now say, see you in heaven.
The U.S. argues the war would end if Hamas would agree to a ceasefire and release all hostages. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, the State Department.
Part of a huge glacier in Switzerland has collapsed. It buried a mountainside village underneath tons of rock and ice. Earlier this month, officials evacuated village residents to safety. At least one person, however, is missing. Swiss authorities say it's one of the largest mass movements of earth ever seen in Switzerland. It appears Broadway has recovered from low attendance triggered by the pandemic. As Jeff London reports from New York, the latest season was record-breaking, with nearly $1.9 billion taken in at the box office.
5 years ago, Broadway theaters were shuttered, and after an 18-month pause from COVID-19, box office and attendance began to tentatively come back. But this past season, Broadway posted its highest box office numbers to date, even if attendance was slightly behind the last season before the pandemic. Part of this trend is the box office bonanza of a few high-profile productions of plays featuring big Hollywood stars, among them Denzel Washington, Jake Gyllenhaal, George Clooney, and Kieran Culkin. Those plays brought in more money in most weeks than big musicals like Wicked, Hamilton, and The Lion King. For NPR News, I'm Jeff London in New York.
You're listening to NPR News.